Hi. Hi. Welcome to SCI-Arc for our guests tonight, and hello to our students who are here, I guess, faculty, staff, and whatnot. My name's Greg, and I've been a part of the lecture series here for a while. I've been in contact with Dagmar for, like, I guess over the 6 months, just kind of getting, things together, talking with her and stuff. But really, it wasn't until recently, like just the other night, that I went over to her place, and she was in a charrette for this competition, and I was really happy, actually, to meet her in this situation. I expected, like, total chaos. I mean, people flying around with razor blades and stuff. I mean, the way it is around here, during a shredder. Actually, I don't like to use shred. I like to use shred. It's more California, I guess. But anyway, we got off. I mean, it was a great chance for me to see her work and get to know her a little bit better. I was amazed at how patient and calm she was with me. I really appreciate that. I think she's quite a terrific person. As far as the statistics go, she was born in Germany. She attended the Royal Art Academy in Copenhagen, and she was actually one of the first students to study under Peter Cook at the Stockholm in Frankfurt for her postgraduate studies. She's taught at Cooper Union and also RISD, and most recently at the Harvard GSD. And she has just recently come over from Boston to teach at UCLA, where she currently is teaching a design studio. Throughout her career, she has done numerous competitions, which she has placed highly in. Most recently, she won 3rd place in the West Coast Gateway competition, and also 2nd place in the Chinchinko competition, the Central Glass. And she is currently, she just got an extension of 1 day on this competition in Mainz, Germany, the National TV Museum competition. This is the one she was working on when I came over. It was interesting to me because when I came in, there's like this little scale white model there, and I was asking her, what the situation is here. And she said, well, this is, our site, and it's here. And she went on to explain that basically they're only allowed these sections, plans, and elevations, and this 1:40 scale white model. And I thought that was pretty interesting. I mean, here for myself at SCI-Arc, I've been working in different mediums, but a lot of times I find myself getting away from representing the ideas I want to convey, and more into the medium, be it plaster, wood, or whatever. I found it very interesting that Dagmar has this I think we'll find in her work, she's very conscientious about representation, and she's very productive at it too. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Dagmar Richter.
Thank you very much. Because we are a charrette, I have to make some improvisation since I was on the slides and stuff like that. Yours? Is near enough? Yeah. Okay, let's start. I'd like to show a selection of my work today. It probably happened in the last 5 years. And because it's always very important to know where we come from, I'd like to say some brief words about my background and how I design. It is difficult today to produce architecture because at the same time one seems to have to defend it highly theoretical, and we have to use language of other fields like philosophy and literary criticism, art history and mathematics. The extensive use of other fields as an objective, and I emphasize objective decision-making instance, is probably not so much a sign of the crisis of architecture, but rather a crisis of architectural criticism, which is in search of the criteria how to read the architecture we producing. I will try to speak explicitly from the designer's point of view, and I still would have to borrow the language of other fields to be able to explain my work. A person called George Lakoff, in one of his recent books called Women, Fire and Dangerous Things, and I only chose that book because of the title, certainly, has something to tell us as architects. He said that reason is not transcendental. It grows out of bodily experience, he says, also referring to other theoreticians. He says that comprehending experience via metaphor is one of the great imaginative triumphs of the human mind. Empirical studies found a significant level of human interaction with the external environment characterized by gestalt perception, mental imagery, and motor movements. Our experience is preconceptually structured at that level. We have the general capacity to deal with part-whole structures in real-world objects via gestalt perception, motor movement, and the formation of rich mutual images. Those impose a preconceptual structure in our experience. And I brought you one of these typical this is that pictures about architectural design. I think it is interesting that when we start to grow up, there are very basic themes, like a container, which has to do with in and out, eating, digestion, or in intellectual thinking, categorization. Another theme is up-down, its dependency on gravity, which normally will be translated into abstraction and hierarchy. There are link schemes, part-whole schemes, center-periphery schemes, front, back, and so on. So that this theory means that reason or objective thought is directly linked to spatial experience, which brings us back to architecture, I think. Theoretical thinking requires a metaphorical mapping from physical space into a conceptual space. And I think that area is what I mainly try to do. Architecture, therefore, could be a powerful discourse where we don't have to use words, which for me, after all, starts to be difficult because I always change languages every 4 years now. I think one should think about how to produce architecture in specifically today, after modernism. And in ancient Greece, for example, if one reads the Iliad or Odyssey, one can find many descriptions of cosmos as the order of things, for example, military formation, beauty of jewelry, the stars, or the way buildings were built. The order of things was a frame which was respected and at the same time challenged, widened by individuals who broke the law. One example is Prometheus, who stole the fire from the gods to bring it actually to the humans, Medea, Cassandra, and many other interesting role models. By breaking the order of things by doing, producing, designing, deciding against the existing customs, These individuals brought a widening of the existing frame, but also bore the risk of having to pay for that dearly. Prometheus was chained to the cliff, and eagles came eating from his liver every year. So, just to give you a powerful example. Later on, poets were thrown out of Plato's Republic because they were useless in finding the truth. And the order of things was gradually defined as rational, objective, and the long suppression, I think, of frame-challenging forces began. Today, after modernism has permanently broken our framework, at least in art, we do not condemn, but in fact are more than willing to reward anyone who challenges the artistic frame. The system of suppression defeated itself. The risk of law-breaking in art and architecture became a virtue without penalty as a sacrifice for permanent entertainment. And there are quite a lot of interesting people like Peter Birger who wrote a lot about the avant-garde and the price we have to pay today. I suggest a rethinking of ancient concepts about challenge and the risk to take, certainly not like the old concepts of being chained to the cliff, but about being more conscious about the decision-making in architectural production, and therefore also emphasizing the process of architectural production more than the ready-made image. We've heard quite a lot in the last lectures about these things, like for example from Marc Angelil, and I don't want to repeat these things. I'm one of the poor ones who sits here every week and listens to the lecture and then has to measure myself against anything which has been said before. For me, I think there's pure German tradition a certain way, but to think about frame challenging, for me there's an interesting difference between Mies van der Rohe's building in Berlin, the National Gallery, right beside the Philharmonie of Sharon. If you think about Mies van der Rohe's way of designing, it has a direct link to a logical system. Nothing can be taken away. Even the unknown room, the cellar in the Greek temple, has disappeared if you think about this project as being a transformation of the Greek temple. Where for me, I think I find myself more drawn towards the history and the tradition of German Expressionism, which Sharon stands for me, where one finds again and again that the theme of the path, as long as you are on the path, there's hope, which is an old and traditional belief in certain religion, has a strong notion and power. So also what begins to happen is there's a very strong awareness of time if you emphasize the path in that case. For example, in his Philharmonie, the path to come to actually the direct concert hall is much more nearly emphasized than being in the concert hall itself, where at the National Gallery you more or less get presented these things right from the beginning. Another interesting part for me has to do with the place. A place in the design process is being confronted with a concept, at least in the production I am doing, and no architecture, I think, can ignore both of these areas. I think there's a profound difference between how to analyze or how to use information concerning place or site. Historicism understands architecture only as an evolution of archetypes. This conception exists of the site only a passive, it expects of the site only a passive role without its own history. The site accepts or receives an intervention coming from the outside. This intervention is seen only in a very narrow context, that is to say, as the evolution of a type or in terms of architectural history. And the type here was always defined in the classical period and then has been simply followed through the history of Western world with only a fraction of the entire society as participants, as we know. I'm convinced that certainly one should know architectural history, but I think in a wider sense. I think it is helpful for one's own production and criticism, but I'm convinced that because of the emergence of a very, very large group of new participants, we have to find our own way to express ourselves. To understand the idea of architecture differently, one could talk about the place in an area of philosophical and radical contextualism, a term Jeffrey Kipnis, not entirely alone, has used. The place or site manifests itself from the beginning by itself and participates in a dialogue with the creator. That is, in a radical context, all times exist simultaneously, topography and architecture overlap. The architect can accept as valuable information text, stream, poetry, pictures that at first glance don't seem to have anything directly to do with the site. This conception of place and its reading opens new possibilities for architectural production. The place is already transformed by its reading because the one-dimensional plan and temporal dependency that had existed up to this point is removed. The place can be analyzed with respect to a form of genetic access. Given these sorts of preconditions, architectural production remains more open and various dimensions can be connected with each other. Our experience of the world around us as a collection of fragments today can help us in architectural production just as they do in psychoanalysis. In a radical context, all the times exist simultaneously. Topography and architecture overlap. The architect can accept everything and try to find out of the information the architect finds a new concept. Concept is dependent on many things. I think mainly one point, it's dependent on our own history. My history started in a very rough industrial town, and my architecture always looked like that. The left one is an area I worked in as a construction site, and the right one is actually a model from an engineer for a production factory for ammonia. I think that we cannot deny our own history, but at the same time we all have very abstract concepts. What you see here is a Theo van Doesburg's painting, which is called Rhythms of a Russian Dance. And you see Mies van der Rohe's first attempt to design a one-family house, which was directly, I think, conceived by a concept about the new abstraction in painting. To work out a concept, I think it starts to have a dialogue with the site. A concept is made up out of various components, historical components that took place during the dialogue, literary components that contain the name of different phenomena, for example, expansion, density, tragedy, joy. Also materialities, description of light, political component of a new formulation of the program. And I think it's very important to realize that we still have something to say about the programmatic aspect of architectural production, and that it makes a difference if one regards architecture just as utilitarian or as a production of commodities, or if one has to add something to that frame. By being politically critical of the program given to the architectural producer and trying to find new formulations, expand views, change the program in competitions, I think one could still make a difference without retracting into the pure formalistic realm. I think I'd like to start with some of my projects which started about '84 and try to show how I use these different components. This project here happened for a competition in Copenhagen. It was a European competition about the development of the Copenhagen harbor. It's the same as all the other cities had, like London had one, and I think New York more or less had one, where the cities realized that the harbor area has been not used or underused, and since the container activities happen somewhere else, what one should do with the harbor. A concept I took on was this analog of the old sail ships which were still sitting within that Copenhagen harbor. And I worked a lot with the site, which was on a very strange arm. On the left side where you see this Nord is a very strange, long, artificial arm which has been used as a dock for boats. And the proposal I did for the competition, and I worked that out partly during the postgraduate studies with Peter Cook and then developed it further on, was to set a rock stage, a rock music electronical stage on the end of that long pier. And as a conceptual drawing, I started to paint or to draw images of disintegration and a launching of a boat, where I then used different concepts to develop the architectural project. On the left side, you see an axonometric section, which then shows you the structure, how it ended up. The structure itself was concrete walls holding up a very light steel frame, which then was traced by canvas and thin materials. It was mainly used during the summer, but had on the back side, after the elevator to the right from you, had like winter use rooms. The plan on the left you see shows the different kind of structures which were in there. There were some steps which hold seats. In the middle was the rock stage itself. On the end were some other situations. And to actually watch the rock music, you had to move along a metal spiral so that you were always permanently in move, which in itself then ended in different spots and areas. The thing got a mention and was published as a protest against the competition which was made and was purely functional, terribly boring, and very uninspired. And I think Copenhagen did not get anything out of that competition. I'd like to just go briefly through some of the projects which I did afterwards. One, for example, was based on a painting which I started to do by studying the site of Kassel. Kassel is in Germany and holds or accommodates a they think, very avant-garde art exhibition every 4 years. It has a large park area which you can see on the right, and a kind of a cup, a landscape cup, which holds the city away from the park. There was in the competition asked for a town wall, more or less, kind of setting up an edge towards the park. And I tried to work on that theme by cutting inside the earth and setting a long structure along that earth, where in that structure different kind of things were happening. Mainly they had to do with housing and food. It started as a food market, which you see on the right, went further on into like Schrotzter hotels, and when the wall finally disconnected itself from the site, because the site kind of moved away from that cliff, the wall just shot over the site in its own force and stopped more or less when engineering couldn't help it anymore. The engineer calculated the steel construction and gave me the limits. I'm sorry, it's a bit slide jumped. But on the right you can see an axle from the underneath side where the steel construction, which first came through the roof, then entered through the building and carried more or less the whole wall structure along. There was a hanging restaurant underneath, and inside that wall was different kind of housing types. The front of the building, the beginning, accommodated a food market, which you see on the left slide. On the right were some studies concerning the elevation within that long, 1 mile long structure. Another thing I do very often is I do very short projects, like 1 week or 6, 7, 8 days for something specific, to normally warm up for something bigger. And that's also what I normally like to do when I teach. This one was a small project for a gate to a city in Paestum. Paestum actually looks like that plan, which really fascinated me right now. There was a road in 1730 which broke through the antique wall, and they were constructing that road, and after they were way over in the half of the site, they found out they were in an antique city building their national road. And actually tried to find the exit, which you see this little curve on the right side, and entered out. What happened then was that they found amazing paintings like the one on the left, which symbolizes the movement between life and death, where you are like within limbo, I say. And also what fascinated me was that road determined which area was excavated or at least exhibited to the public, and which area was like kept totally as a normal flower field. So every major structure, temples, plazas, things were just like cut by nearly like a surgeon's cut. I did a very short project about that concerning the entrance wall. It was made out of metal, rusting metal. In between those were inserted like metal pieces, which were precious metal, and the tower, directly referring back to the painting I found, not to the Lenin Tribune, was functioning in such a way that you could walk up the tower and look over the city and finally understand its structure, because the structure in itself is mainly only about 4 feet high. I then moved to the United States and right away tried to do something very dry, very minimal. It was asked to be artists' housing in Boston. There was a competition, a national competition about 2 years ago. And I was mainly fascinated by these twin-type buildings, which you can see on the right, always 2 buildings very much adjacent to each other. And I started to develop a plan which accommodated on the north side all the artist studios, and on the south side all the housing. In front of these twin types there was a steel structure which you could use to exhibit work. And in the section, the inner core was used as one direct staircase, where then things were distributed to both different sides. And both sides had different room heights dependent on studio. You need higher rooms and also higher floor load. There were 2 different types, like this is a shorter version of it and a model. And I certainly didn't win anything. One fascination I must admit I have is about airships. And that was the concept for that project we did here together with a friend of mine who lives in Germany, Ulrich Hinrichsmeyer. And since then, once in a while, we work together whenever we have the time to fly either to Europe or he to the United States. And this project here was about a Chincan Chico competition, was called the Intelligent Market. They were asking for a new architectural type to exchange artificial intelligence instead of apples. So we thought it would be a great idea to use the concept of airship and study airship spaces. Those spaces, I had these books since I was a small child, always looking into these spaces. They were made to accommodate or to construct the airship. I wasn't really interested in the airship's image as fact actually the inside of the airship. As you can see to the right, when it was finished, my fascination stopped, where on the left, when it was still in progress, I was rather intrigued by it. So we, as you know, you only can give in 1 sheet often by these international utopian competitions, and we decided to build an airship, which you can see on the right. what the idea was, we wanted to try to find a new concept where you could shift sections to plans and plans to sections, so that actually this old postmodern concept of plan or section would disappear. So this airship was supposed to be flat, which means horizontal, and it would float in the air when not in use or going from one way to the other. It was consistent, or it consisted of compressed spaces, which are these rather dark spaces, which you could physically use, and then expanded spaces, which were transparent, glass-like spaces, which you only could visually use. It was purely, certainly, utopian competition. They didn't want to build it. And so we decided that these expanded spaces were used for like projections and visual things, but that what we were mainly working with is that we were always shifting sections to plans and plans to section at any time we started to design it, and build some disrupted glass models where we tried to find out how these spaces could work. And that's the one we got the second prize for. I then moved very quickly to another competition, which was again a kind of a actually a 3-day project about a monument for women, the women's right to vote in Seneca Falls. They found this strange old church where, like 1840, 300 people met to vote or to demand the right for women to vote. And this church, was now kind of revealed, and you found these old structure, which you see in the section to the left, not much more than that. And they asked for a kind of a memorial. What I did was I tried to develop a certain kind of a framework. It was a floating auditorium on the back, in front of a double wall. The auditorium could be used for lectures and things. And you look through the space, the raw space of the church, protected by a glass roof, through a 4-level metal framework, or rather a kind of a 3-dimensional museum where you could walk through different kind of ramps to find out about the women's history. And the site exactly where the church itself has been, and you can only see the rest of it, should have been planted by 300 red roses. They didn't like it. So I decided to work again with this one I did myself, and now again I work with Ulrich Hinrichsmeyer. We were invited, as Morphosis was invited, and lots of people actually in Berlin, for a big exhibition called Berlin kind of monument or thought model. And we tried to plan a city called Berlin 3. We wanted to have a Berlin 3 as being nearly like the black hole of peace. So we were starting to use concepts of implosions and read a lot about like time frames and black holes and things happening. And we hoped that we could develop a plan, which was again a pure concept for an exhibition, to convey, to kind of draw both energies from both Berlin 1 and Berlin 2 into that Berlin 3, where Berlin 3 would declare itself as being neutral and a kind of a mental exchange would happen. The concept was meant to be mainly electronical. And we started to study a lot of implosion rooms. On the left you see a room which is for music, and the right is the Märzbau of Schwitters in the Dada. Both of them were clear concepts which we were rather fascinated with. We started to look at the site, which is on the left, and many of you might see it. It's a Potsdam station. Wim Wenders used it for the last movie, something about angels, where this one old guy was sitting. Pardon? Wings of Desire, yeah. Where this one guy was sitting always on one seat, rocking back and forth, talking about Berlin history. And we used that site, independent of him, because we started before the film came out. We didn't know about it. We used that site, which right now is a void and has been an old station, to convey that Berlin 3. The proposal was that they would have 3 sensors in the west, 3 sensors to the east, which you see floating around in the plan, the 6 machines. And they were sensoring specific activities in both sides and directly sending them back towards the site itself, which was Berlin 3. You could use the machines independently, which means these sensors, to walk in, to give your opinions, to protest, to redesign things, to ask for conditions. And we were looking at the network of Berlin as being different kind of layers of electronics, physical layers, and started to work on sections which are on the right. The sections were generated by a lot of different cultural activities, partly paintings, Klee paintings, Hans Richter paintings, lots of activities, dances. There's a leg from one of the Dada dancers within that side section. And we started to transform these different shapes and things we found within that implosion block, which you see to the left. That block sits along a long railway, which actually connects the east and the west. The east is above and the west is underneath, which we declared as being a peace park. And we used text from Paul Celan, who's the only poet, supposedly, who writes about the Second World War, to convey what kind of a content we would like these things to have. To show some drawings and studies we did. To the left is a sketch of the implosion space. To the right are different kind of plans which were generated by the site's history, concepts, electronical plans, and partly text. It then ended in different various drawings and axonometrics, where within that implosion blocks we tried to find a new archetype, which means we were accepting the block structure, the Berlin block structure, but were transforming the block structure with a kind of a modernist approach, which means that within the perimeter of the block, object-like modern buildings would happen, though at the same time you always would have the street edge more or less intact. Those are different axonometrics of the space, and another section at later on stayed on the back side. Then we started to build models on the left, how to build a skin where you could convey different layers of information, and we used a lot of glass. Again, I'm sure we have certain kind of connection with the old expressionists who used a lot, were very fascinated by glass architecture. And the panel on the right then was given in to the exhibition with another model which you see on the right, which consisted of the first layer, which was the skin, and then like 6, 7 other plexiglass layers behind, where you could see white drawings. It was very difficult to photograph when I left. That was the only photograph I could keep. I think to make a break from all these images. Los Angeles. I haven't been in Los Angeles when I started the West Coast Gateway competition. I didn't know what it was all about. I was mainly interested in the competition because of the site. The site conveyed to me a quite specific idea about traces in history. There were like landscapes, there were layers of cities, there were transports and cuts, and then suddenly they asked for a structure about whatever, 30 feet above a highway, 9-lane, totally impossible. Air and noise, very, very difficult environmental, if not earthquake structural problems, which we know now about. And so they thought they should give away the air rights of the Hollywood freeway, which probably is not really true. I think the competition was a very clear political move from the guy who organized it to get voters for Dukakis, because it was very much, the competition was very much interested, at least they were very much interested in the competition until the day the election was over and California did not vote for the Democrats. The organizer was the major fundraiser for the Dukakis election, and he thought he would probably be able to get more voices by kind of getting permanently into the news by talking about immigrants. And he was Greek, and he was all talking about the Chinese and Japanese and so on, how fantastic and wonderful, and that's why we need this fantastic new structure instead of New York, because LA, we are so thankful. Oh yes, we are. And so I think it was quite a smart move. At least he got in the news pretty often, and he was very nice to convey to us that he wants to have very young firms. Probably the old ones would have sued him for all that. And so he invited all these inventive people. We were mainly interested in it because of the site, which you probably know, it's this strange highway. And we were mainly interested in it because of traces. I started to work at that point together. I always work with people who are around, or sometimes I work, or mainly I work alone, and sometimes I work with other people. Shane O'Neill was one of the collaborators, and Tom Robertson started to come into the project very short after we started. And we gave each other 11 days to study the site and to do something about it. I just came home from the Berlin exhibition, which I just finished, so I wasn't really willing to go into a big thing, but we got quite caught by the site and studied the traces of Los Angeles in that area, studied all these different plans, used them together in an information. Here you see two traces. One is rather peaceful. It's people wandering from one city to the other. The other one is a military camp, and photographed by an airship. And we gave in these two things. They fit together so that the left one fits on top of the right one. We built a quick model, and we said we were interested in revealing all these different layers within that site which happened during the history. In the section which you can see here, for example, we were working with the layers which happened before, revealing them, kind of opening them up, using them in a vertical wall structure, and then kind of lifting up the landscape and the structure of the landscape as we thought in all these plans we found it. That landscape then got into a kind of a very three-dimensional, very urban park, which we thought is the only thing you could actually use up there, 30 feet above. And we were very interested how people actually in the end would walk up 30 feet to do anything to cross the highway. We also were interested in the underside, which you will see further on, of that whole structure, because we thought that the structure itself was more a sculpture for everyone who was passing by. I think there were about 500,000 cars or whatever, nearly a day or something. It was amazing numbers. So we were working on these two. That's the model. On the right you see this kind of lift-up wall, which was kind of protecting the Spanish area, the Pico area as well, from the noise and the pollution of the highway. And then we lifted up this kind of structure as we found it, let's say, within the highway, with a very simple construction. So we got into the second round, as some other people. And our concern, or specifically perhaps mine, was at that point to make an exercise with some engineers from the Over Arab office to make it entirely and truly buildable, to make it economic as they asked us for, and to make it real, and find out how far we could go from the last project we had to a project which in itself would be very dry, represented, and clearly kind of studied. The last project we had to have calculators on it, would have cost $490 million. So we decided to start from the beginning and said, okay, let's try with price, and we gave each other a price of 35 million, which they thought, and we had this amazing strange professional firms on it, who these guys, all Irish, walking in with ties, telling us, nope, it's too expensive, and so we start from the beginning. So we thought it was quite an interesting exercise to find out how far we could go. So the wall, which before was on the long side, 4 blocks long and a rather mega structure, ended up rather as a sign, which you see here, the view from the Hollywood Highway. It was the front of a longitudinal section. On the right you see the site plan. Here on the left you see what we ended up as a plan. We had the vertical wall on the right, you see it on the right side, addressing a 3-dimensional park exactly as before, with kind of different layers. In these layers we were working with 3, let's say, points in Los Angeles history. We said in the beginning there was water, or there had to be water if they ever wanted to do something. So the lowest level trays were all water trays. The next level was landscape. So we had a protective tray, which you see with these kind of vertical lines, who were like a boat, more or less, a vessel. We call it a vessel, holding the next tray upwards, so that there could be rich plant life, which we should have needed. At least the engineers told us all that, if we wanted to do something about the air quality above the highway. The water was always falling from one level to the next by then doing more or less a white noise, which was killing the other noise, but at the same time, because it was like floating all over the structure, it was cleaning the air from the highway underneath. So we had a lot of experiments going on. And here on the left you see a perspective of the so-called urban park. On the right you see the plant trays, which were underneath. The next level we called the abstract urban surface, the one which they first started to clear the earth before they tried to do anything else, which are these surfaces which should have been used for meetings and this and that. And the third levels, which you see probably on the elevation on the right, had to do with like floating volumes or cubes within these surfaces. You have the vertical wall on the left, which then was holding library and other things. And we were working with one simple image, which in itself started, or hopefully should convey, the idea of vessel. On the left, several gates. The whole thing, because it was still three blocks long, produced permanent gate situations between the two areas, so that it was easier for you to cross the highway. Another gate to the left, and a perspective from the highway underneath, where actually you could see all these different trays and water trays coming up. And we were very interested in the architectural expression, not so much as the other people were rather more interested in electronical and other stuff expression. So we thought the raw space should convey what we wanted to do, and then they could add the electronics if they wanted to. We were interested very much in the underneath, as you can see on the model to the left, and also in the construction of the thing, which you see in the 1/4-inch scale section to the right, where all these different systems were drawn through and studied, and tried to find out if we could do it and how much it would cost. It was quite fun. Model underneath, on the right, you have the final model, which then was in the second round, where we got the third prize. The city and the structure itself looked a little bit like that. And we tried to do, as you can see on the left, to build up these layers, the trays, the surfaces, the volumes, the water things, as a kit of parts. So we had a very simple structure, and then we set these layers and layers of construction onto each other and starting to cut into it to find these different sites. It was quite a frantic situation, and I think if we should have known how the situation actually, how they abused these young officers, we probably wouldn't, I don't know, at least wouldn't have given in time as other people did. But it was for us an amazing experience to find out to be real, which was one of my new exercises. We were sitting in that villa here to the right. The villa was empty in Cambridge, and a friend of mine gave it to us for the time of the competition. I didn't have any money, no one had money. It was permanently the question who's going to buy the next pizza. After we were finished, they were rather impressed, it seems, so they decided that I should rebuild the villa, which means at least renovate that villa. And you could have seen my face when I saw it, that was not really anything I was interested to do. But so I thought, no, we lost so much money on the competition, perhaps I should try. So on the left, I have a plan, which is very thin and actually in the end rather uninteresting, but it is a very traditional situation where we kind of cleaned up the whole thing. And Tom Robertson was still at that point in the office. Shane O'Neill disappeared all over the United States at that point, and we never saw him again. I think he ended up in Cornell and probably is there still. We were always having to fly back and forth. I had to fly at the same. He was in the end flying between Cornell and Cambridge, and I was flying between New York and Cambridge because I was still teaching at the Cooper Union. So what came out of this money maker was a kitchen, again interested in the price, in real conditions. So we used a very, very normal wood mode, or whatever these kitchens are called, straightforward kitchen, and changed all the parts within the kitchen by designing the handrail and by adding a specifically sun-protective sandblasted glass on top of the whole kitchen, so you couldn't see the ugly kitchen behind. The people didn't want to invest so much money, as you can see in the stove, but we had interest in just the detailing, how to hold the glass, how transparencies would work, and to find the most beautiful marble in our life, which is actually granite on the left, and to how to integrate a roof light, which you see on the right, these spikes, and how to do a rather minimal glass cabinet within a very traditional structure, and extremely traditional and conservative clients, by the way. There was not much you could do. Also, we did a cabinet. Again, transparencies were interesting. Behind that cabinet, it's in the bathroom, it's like all the clothes of the owner. We invented a new bathroom floor to the left, which was about dyeing wood, the wood things within the bathroom floor, and then lacquering it over instead of using tile. And we built a 2-floor library on the right, where the client was insisting on an 18th century library, so it was pretty difficult. Here on the left you see the raw structure, which I prefer. Then we did our little games like hanging things down and drilling them through the handrail, and plumb bobs, I think the most beautiful ones we found hanging from underneath. Was quite a frantic time, and quite an interesting experience for me to be involved in the building process, as we, at that time, up to then, if I was not working in a firm straightforward, I was either teaching or using representation, which is the theme of your lecture, to talk about architecture. And we had here some rotating tabletops. When you came up, there was a 2.5 floor high book wall. The tabletops could turn. You could then go up the stair, which you see the ladder on the right, and put your books on the back side. And as you see, they were on. I've not seen the building. Some friends sent me that when they were like putting the books in. But there's still a lot of things missing. This is from the end of the frame, which then goes into the bathroom frame, like how the library ends. It's all black anodized aluminum and mahogany wood. Oh, could you exchange these two? Well, this one is supposed to be on the right. Anyway, again, a very short warm-up project, which we did over the summer. actually to come to this one, which I'm doing right now. It was this new Cinque Chico competition, which Bernard Tschumi seems to be the juror on, and that's how it fits together, if you could imagine it. And it was a very descriptive program. It was called Disc Programming. Already his part was like printed all over the place, and it was clear what is going to happen. And he asked for a project which worked on the overlapping of work, leisure, and housing. So he asked for a housing scheme 1 by 1 mile, not very regular. We had to add a robot factory or any other kind of assemblage factory and some leisure things like bicycle paths onto that housing scheme. I decided to use a stripe in Los Angeles because I knew I was going over here, and so I was interested in the specific tension between the Hollywood, the Paramount picture and the Hollywood Cemetery, which is this imploded structure up to the right. And from there, directly tracing a line into the Hollywood Hills towards the Hollywood sign. In itself, already when you trace these lines, you have a very clear inherent structure and inherent order, which had to do that the ordered system belonged to the poor, and the picturesque system of, like we called it, the spaghettis on the right, were a part of the affluent looking down onto the poor. So we decided to be disruptive and use the ordered system from underneath to carve into the picturesque system and integrating a robot factory, which was a straight cut. Always when you were within one system, you could see the order of the other one going into the hills. There are two sections of these robot factories. It's a bit unclear, the town plan where we were talking about these two orders overlapping. At the same time, because it was a futuristic project, we said that the highway was not going to be used anymore, that we used the smooth and picturesque structures of the highway to start to contaminate the ordered system of Hollywood, and therefore start to integrate a park within that, where we then started to integrate like workspaces at the Hollywood Hill areas. I don't know if I should show it. We haven't heard. I just heard yesterday that it arrived. So, to end, I'd like to show what we're doing right now. We actually drew it up about in the last 3 days. It was Tom Robertson again, and Petra Larsen was there, and Lisa Hansen, who is one of the speediest drawers I've ever seen in my life, who suddenly showed up with her triangle in the middle of the night and said, okay, let's the thing get over with. And so we started. It's a TV museum. They were asking for the exhibition of the history of TV. They wanted the people to be critical. Germans always want to be so pedagogical about, like, people should be clear about the danger of the TV and should convey like a political meaning. So at the same time, they want to have 500 parking lots on the left on the site plan. There's a big station, a station which is a high-speed train stop between Paris actually and Copenhagen. And so they needed some parking lots. So we decided, which you see this long structure underneath in the site plan, to set a double rhythm up between TVs and cars. On the right you see a very raw section, it's not been drawn finished yet, which always like works with that double rhythm of like rotating TV monitors, where you could drive along the parking structure, and then when there was no car, the monitors were rotating into the parking lots, and when there were more and more parking lots being occupied, they were rotating inside that compressed wall. The left has one elevation of the parking structure as it is. On the right there is a plan showing you this kind of double rhythms and like how to get up and down. And we also added some shops to it. The museum itself, we had to integrate an existing old industrial structure, which is this old-looking thing. Then I used a tower element and a tilted steel wall, which then conveyed some balconies within that structure, and started to produce a kind of a space in between where the staircases are going back and forth within. Again, those plans aren't finished. Lisa, yesterday night, actually started to do that perspective on the left, which is about the TV theater itself, and on the right you see the elevation of the tower and the steel wall, which is actually exactly at the edge of the old town wall. So the TV museum is a part of the old medieval town, where the parking structure is actually a part of that nearly neoclassical new structures outside of the town wall, where we decided to keep a clear distance between these two. In the end, I'd like to say that I show you my first project. When I started studying, I was building in ice. I wanted to know more about spaces, and was going to Poland with a class in Stuttgart to find out about structures and hanging structures and this and that. And I think the spirit we had at that time, by trying to find things out and to always go into new challenges and not using easy answers, not falling back into certain categories of always kind of jumping out of the framework anytime it got kind of boring, is the thing I'd like to go on with if I can. Thank you.